Hi everybody, this week we will be looking at corporate governance in organizations. So over the previous weeks, since in the semester, we looked at business level strategies, which dealt primarily with cost and differentiation strategies. Then we looked at corporate level strategies, which include vertical integration, diversification, mergers and acquisitions, and strategic alliances. We're now going to look at how the overall organization is run and the factors under management that affect the firm's overall strategy. And this is the topic, corporate governance. So first, we're going to look at what corporate governance really is. It is a set of mechanisms used to manage the relationship among stakeholders and to determine and control the strategic direction and performance of organizations. It identifies ways to ensure that strategic decisions are made effectively. And it establishes harmony between the firm's owners and its top-level managers whose interests may conflict. It also ensures that the interests of top-level managers are aligned with the interests of the shareholders. So basically, corporate governance is really about how the firm is run and the mechanisms that are put in place by the firm to make sure that good decisions are made and the company remain competitive and maintain its strategic competitiveness in the marketplace. We will look at the relationship between owners and managers, and this includes agency relationships and the costs related to instituting these governance mechanisms. Then we will look at the three internal governance mechanisms, which are ownership concentration, board of directors, executive compensation, and then an external mechanism, which is the market for corporate control. And then finally, we will look at corporate governance and managerial ethics. So what is the relationship between owners and managers? First, we will look at the separation of ownership and managerial control. The separation of ownership allows shareholders to purchase stock, which entitles them to income from the firm's operations after paying its expenses. Those incomes are, for instance, dividends that are paid. So when you have stock and the dividends that is paid from it, that is the income that it speaks about here. We call it residual returns. This requires that shareholders also take a risk that the firm's expenses may exceed its revenue. So if at the end of the year the firm don't make any money, you don't get any residual returns. And that is implied or agreed once you buy shares in a firm. So times gone by, a large number of family-owned firms, ownership and managerial control were not separated. So the owners of the company run their own businesses. However, to avoid potential problems when these firms grow and become more complex, and especially if they are largely diversified, their owners may contract with managerial specialists. So they employ a CEO, managing director, or any such title. So these managers make major decisions in the owners' firms and are compensated on the basis of their decision-making skills. So if you are a highly skilled manager, then the more likely you are to earn one of the big CEO salaries. So what is an agency relationship? By definition, it is the separation between owners and managers. So the person that owns the firm does not manage the firm. And the relationship between that owner and the person that manages the firm is called the agency relationship. The owner of the firm hires a decision specialist. So for example, even though Bill Gates owns Microsoft, the CEO of Microsoft is an Indian guy named Satya Nadella. And there are many other examples that I could use. NCB, Michael Leachin, does not run the company. Hilton is the CEO. But there are other examples of agency relationships that we will mention but not focus on here. So other examples of agency relationships are like consultants and clients, insurer. And within the organization, agency relationships also include the relationship between the managers and the employees in the organization. So it's important for you to understand that the agency relationship means that the owner of the organization have a relationship with the person that manages the organization. So an agency relationship exists when one party delegates decision-making responsibility to a second party for compensation. Agency relationships are not without problems. Some of these problems are the owner and the manager may have different interests and goals. So the owner may want to bring or push the company in one direction, and the manager wants to push the company in a different direction. Maybe the owner wants to diversify, or the manager wants to keep the firm as it is and build in this particular industry. So they may have different interests and goals. Also, because shareholders lack direct control of large publicly traded corporations, an agent makes decisions that result in the pursuit of goals that conflict with those of the principals. So this stems from the first point. They have different interests, but the second point is saying that the manager or the CEO may make decisions that the owner of the company is not in agreement with. And because the manager has the authority, the CEO has the authority to make that decision, then there pretty much isn't anything that the owner can do. Also, the separation of ownership and control potentially allows divergent interests to surface, which can lead to managerial opportunism. And we will now look at what managerial opportunism is. Managerial opportunism is the seeking of self-interest with guile. It means that you're being deceitful. You are not being transparent or upfront with whatever decisions you are making or things that you are doing in the business. Opportunism is both an attitude and a set of behaviors. So you have an inclination to do a particular thing, to act in your own self-interest and not the interest of the company or the staff, the organization as a whole. It is not possible for principals to know beforehand which agents will or will not act opportunistically, because when you employ someone, you employ them primarily based on their skill set, and even though we do testing, psychometric testing, it won't tell you everything. You will not know the true character of a person and that kind of thing. So you may employ someone that comes highly recommended, but you really don't know at that time if they are going to act opportunistically in your business. So owners and or principals establish governance and control mechanisms to prevent agents from acting opportunistically. And research suggests that when CEOs feel constrained by governance mechanisms, they are more likely to seek external advice that in turn helps them to make better strategic decisions. So because these mechanisms are in place, then the CEO has no choice but to go to the board for advice or consult other managers rather than act in his own interest. So it is saying here that these mechanisms prevent managers from acting opportunistically. These mechanisms, as they relate to the agency relationship, comes at a cost. The firms incur cost when it uses one or more governance mechanism. The agent costs are the sum of incentive cost, which is payments to the manager, CEO, because you have to make their incentive package attractive. We'll talk about that later on. Monitoring and enforcement costs. So you may have to set up a compliance department, which means that you have to employ more people. And that comes at a cost. And of course, the individual shareholders, owners, will also experience financial loss because they have to pay for these things. They're paying for incentive like stock options or that kind of thing, in addition to the CEO's salaries. And of course, they're paying a lot of money to a whole compliance department, and that comes at a loss to the owners. If a firm is diversified, governance costs increase because it is more difficult to monitor what is going on inside the firm. So the more companies you have, you are diversified along the vertical chain, your own value chain, then it is harder to monitor those companies and understand or keep track of what is happening. And that also comes at an incredible cost. So let us now look at the governance mechanisms that are actually used by firms. First, we have ownership concentration. And this is the number of large block shareholders and the total percentage of shares that they own. So in businesses or businesses that are publicly traded or on the stock market, hundreds of thousands or even millions of persons have shares in a company. But the large block shareholders now are persons that own at least 5% of the corporation's issued shares. And even though that sounds like a small amount, it actually is not. So large block shareholders are increasingly active in their demands that corporations adopt effective governance mechanisms to control managerial decisions. And just to give you an example of a large block shareholder, Jeff Bezos owns Amazon, and he is the largest shareholder and he has 11% shares in Amazon. Even though he's the richest man in the world, he only owns 11% of Amazon because the rest of the shares on the stock market and random people or other companies that invest in the business own a percentage of Amazon. So you will see that like the large block means the few people at the top. I think there are 4 persons in Amazon that holds top 25% of the stock, and they are more likely to want accountability from the company. Then we have diffuse ownership. So it is a large number of shareholders with small holdings and few, if any, large block shareholders. This causes weak monitoring of a manager's decisions, because as a shareholder that only have a very small percentage, a very small amount of share in a company, most times you don't have the input in how the business is run. You have to basically watch the stock market or talk to your investors, and you really don't have an input. So for example, diffuse ownership makes it difficult for owners to effectively coordinate their actions. So many people own shares in the business that it's even hard to have a meeting. Most companies once a year have a general meeting or a shareholder meeting, and most times very few people turn up for those meetings. So people don't even have the time to track that. They just want to look at their balance sheet or their account and see how much money they have in their stock portfolio. The other mechanism we will look at is the board of directors. The board of directors is a group of individuals whose primary responsibility is to act in the owner's best interest by formally monitoring and controlling the corporation's top-level managers. Boards have the power to direct the affairs of the organization, punish and reward managers, and protect shareholders' rights and interests. Any appropriately structured and effective board of directors protects owners from managerial opportunism. And the board directors are seen as stewards of their company's resources, and the way they carry out these responsibilities affects the society in which their firms operate. So the board of directors really oversee the company. They look at balance sheets and reports and really monitor what is happening in a company. The board of directors usually meet, I would say, maybe once a month, and that is when major decisions about the company are made, because the CEO usually does not have the autonomy to make certain decisions without going to the board for approval first. So board members are often called directors and are classified into 3 groups. Insiders, and these are active top-level managers in the corporation who are elected on the board because they are a source of information about the firm's day-to-day operations. So usually the managing director or the CEO is also on the board. Then we have related outsiders. They have some relationship with the firm, contractual or otherwise, that may create questions about their independence. But these individuals are not involved in the corporation's day-to-day activities. So maybe they do own shares, but they are not corresponding with the CEO regularly, for instance. They just go to board meetings and oversee the organization. Then you have the outsiders that provide independent counsel to the firm and may hold top-level managerial positions in other companies or may have been elected on the board prior to the beginning of the current CEO's tenure. So we see often in the newspaper or on, for instance, UTech email, we see when lecturers are appointed to boards and other business people are appointed to certain boards on other companies, even though they have pretty much no association with the company, but they're there because of their expertise and probably they have good managerial skills and good oversight skills, so they're appointed to the board, and they are called outsiders because they pretty much don't have anything to do with the company. as opposed to the insiders that work there and the related outsiders that probably have shares but not involved in the day-to-day activities. The outsiders have absolutely nothing to do with the company. They just come in for their skills and expertise. The last internal mechanism is executive compensation. And this is a governance mechanism that seeks to align the interests of managers and owners through salaries, bonuses, and long-term incentive compensation, such as stock awards and options. And this is the incentive that I was talking about with the agency relationship coming at a cost. Long-term incentives will ensure that top executives will act in shareholders' best interest. So many times when a CEO is being employed, they get certain benefits that a normal employee would not get. If it's a publicly traded company, they get stock options, which means that they have the stock forever. Even if they stop working at the company, they still own the stock. They also get things like certain performance incentives, that is a percentage of the profit that the company makes for the year. And those things are usually comes at a high cost to the company. Top executives' pay and the performance of a firm are closely aligned, and that is natural, because if you are getting that amount of salary, then it is natural that you are going to want to work hard and make the best decisions and make sure that the company earns as much as possible, so that when you get your incentive, which is a percentage of the firm's profit, then that incentive would be substantial. So for example, the top 2 executives' salary at NCB in 2013 totaled $232 million. And that was 7 years ago, so I'm sure that that figure is a lot more than it was in 2013. So the top 2 persons in the organization, their annual salary was $232 million. And this is the kind of money that some of these large corporations that post profit in the billions of dollars, these are the salaries that they pay their top level managers. And again, what this does is that it drives performance, because the manager knows that this company must perform well, because he cannot really essentially afford to lose a job that is paying him, say, $100 million in Jamaica. So the last one, which is the external mechanism that is used by companies, is the market for corporate control. So what that means is that an external governance mechanism that becomes active when a firm's internal controls fails. So they have to go outside the firm now. So the market for corporate control of individuals and firms that buy ownership positions in or take potentially undervalued corporations. So they can form new divisions in established diversified companies or merge 2 previously separate firms. The non-performing firm's top-level managers are assumed to be responsible for poor performance and are usually replaced. Thus, when the market for corporate control operates effectively, it ensures that managers who are ineffective or act opportunistically are disciplined. So in a nutshell, what this means is that if the internal mechanisms do not work and the company is not performing well, then you can have what we have seen in the previous unit in mergers and acquisitions. You can have some kind of a takeover, and a hostile takeover is a major activity in the market for corporate control governance. So the major shareholders, so the large block shareholders, may decide that they are going to take over the company, merge it with another company, or sell the company to somebody else, to another firm, because the company is not operating well and they need to get rid of the CEO and bring the company back to where it used to be, or form another company completely. So I don't think that this happens often, but it is something that is used in companies across the world if necessary. The last topic I'm going to look at is ethical behavior and corporate governance. Governance mechanisms focus on the control of managerial decisions that ensure that shareholders' interests will be served. Product market stakeholders, those are the customers, the suppliers, and host communities. And organizational stakeholders, which are managerial and non-managerial employees, are important as well. So it is saying it's not just the owners of the company that are important. The product market stakeholders and the organizational stakeholders are important as well. But the needs of all stakeholders need to be satisfied through the firm's actions. They cannot just be focusing on one and not the other. Ethically responsible companies design and use governance mechanisms that serve all stakeholders' interests. All corporate owners are vulnerable to unethical behavior and very poor judgments exercised by their employees, including top-level managers. So basically, all companies will have breaches in ethical behavior. And we have seen a lot of that locally in recent times. So the decisions and actions of a corporation's board of directors can be very effective deterrent to these behaviors, because you have to go to the board for approval and they are like an oversight committee. Then it is less likely that unethical behavior will prevail. Effective boards participate actively to set boundaries for their firm's business ethics and values. Once formulated, the board's expectations related to ethical decision and actions of all the firm's stakeholders must be clearly communicated to its top-level managers. So, for instance, when some firms employ employees and you are given an orientation of what you can and cannot do, the same thing applies to top-level managers, just that what they can and cannot do is more complicated or complex, and they have a higher level of accountability than certain lower level staff. These managers must understand that the board will hold them fully accountable for the development and support of an organizational culture that allows unethical decisions and behaviors. And to close, I will just look at one example of Enron. I know most of you don't know Enron because this happened before, maybe before some of you were born, or when you were very young. So Enron Corporation is an American energy commodities and service company that was based in Houston, Texas in the United States. So they orchestrated a scheme to hide the amount of debt, because they had a lot of debt and toxic assets, and they wanted to hide this from their investors and their creditors. So they fooled regulators with fake holdings and off-the-books accounting practices, and this eventually led to the bankruptcy of Enron. And the stock went from like $90-something to 26 cents overnight. So Enron's collapse and the financial havoc it wreaked on its stakeholders and employees led to new regulations and legislation to promote the accuracy of financial reporting for publicly held companies. So they are an example. Enron is an example of ineffective or bad corporate governance, and some of the executives in Enron also went to prison, because in addition to all that they had done, they tried to hide evidence and shred the accounting documents and all of that. And I don't know what happened with the board, but then something must have gone terribly wrong, that the board did not see what was happening, because this was happening over a period of time. So just to reinforce that corporate governance is important, how the company is run is important, because then the other things, your business level strategy, your corporate level strategy is essentially not effective if the company is not properly run. Okay, so what you will need to do now, ladies and gentlemen, is to read the chapter on corporate governance so that you can get a better understanding of the concepts that were discussed here. Okay, bye.